This is the Last Minute Blues Podcast with Donnie Fandango, Jeff Burton, Alex Ferrario, and former Blues defenseman Jamie Rivers.
It is the Last Minute Blues Podcast. Donnie Fandango joined in studio by Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic, as well as Alex Ferrario from 101 ESPN. So, the Blues have one game remaining in the 2023-2024 season. But this does not feel like sort of the end of the season. This really feels like sort of like the beginning. You know what I mean? Like, we're just getting into the weeds of this thing, boys. I can't wait.
It feels like last year, only the difference is last year you had all the expectations, and I don't think anything backed it up. I think the excitement last year was the draft, because you had the 10th overall pick, and you're like, oh, could they win the lottery? I was completely wrong with my tinfoil theory that the Blackhawks weren't going to win it, and then look what happened. Really thought the Blues were going to get that Connor Bedard fella. And then it was like after the draft, it was like, okay, this feels like the draft isn't as important. Everything else behind the draft is where it's going to take place via offseason and moves. But, hey, the fact that they got to the second to last game of the season with impact is so much better than last year, where it felt like they were out of it by, March 8th, 9th, 10th? That was a massive change.
Could I have another minute? I just sprinted up the stairs.
JR just did a marathon.
I gotta tell you this real quick while you get a breather. So on Saturday morning, I did a remote or a gig with the Friends of Kids with Cancer. They do a walk with a friend out at Creve Coeur Memorial Lake every year. It was their 24th anniversary of doing it. It was a really great event. So once the event is almost over, this gentleman comes up to me to say hello, and he was like, "Hey, Donnie, am I the only Blues fan that's pretty satisfied with how this season has been altogether?" He was like, "Listen, I understand that I'm a pretty rational and reasonable person in general, but," and then he starts ticking down. Jake Neighbors, the goaltending situation, the help that's on the way. And he's like, "What are all these people complaining about?" He's like, "Oh, well, they're St. Louis sports fans, so they got to complain about something." But I have never wanted to give a Blues fan a big burly hug so much as I wanted to give this guy, because he was like, "Dudes, this is a glass half full situation. What are we freaking out about?"
Did you feel gratified after all these podcasts where you've been the positive one and I've made you feel bad afterwards?
No, dude, because I have been friggin' flipping and flopping all friggin' year. And I'm gonna do it again today. I mean, it's just how it works.
Season.
But it was just a very nice, man, it was a nice moment where a Blues fan did not come up to you talking about the boys with their hair on fire about something.
I think it's a fair take. I think it's somewhat easy to do at the very end of the season, just kind of step up and say, wow, this was kind of what I expected and played out as you hoped. And actually there were some positives with all the names you just mentioned. But I still think, even with that said, and you can say, okay, this was a great, first year of the retool, but you could have made the playoffs.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
You're right.
You could have made it.
Which would have been a bigger step than what you've accomplished this year.
Yes.
A bigger step. I mean, and we're not saying you might have made the playoffs. You realistically could have made the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So my thought is, it was a great first year of the retool. It's about where you thought they'd be. But does that mean we've lowered the standard so much that we're letting the team off the hook for going 0-2-1 against San Jose, 0-2 against Columbus, lose to Chicago, and miss the playoffs by a couple points? So yeah, a lot of positives, and now that we're at the end of the season, we can focus on that a little bit. But as Alex said, I think it could have been better.
I think that's where the difference is, because I feel that way the same way that individual did, to where Jake Neighbors, Alexei Toropchenko, Zach Bolduc, Robert Thomas, Colton Parayko, Matthew Kessel, even Nick Leddy to a sense, both goaltenders. That's 10 names that I just mentioned that should be getting you excited. But the overall team play is the part that feels like it didn't get you to where. Because Doug said at the beginning of the season you wanted to be in the upper half of the middle tier. I'd say you were there. But he said he wanted to be a playoff team, fight for the third place spot. You weren't there. But, I mean, look at it right now. You're 3 points still behind the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, obviously, you can't catch them, but 3 points behind them with 1 game to go. I mean, at the end of the season, you really could be talking about if you would have won 2 out of the 3 against San Jose and 1 game against the Columbus Blue Jackets, you're in a playoff team.
Yeah.
You're a playoff team, which we would be talking completely differently about this team, because first year of the retool, getting into the playoffs. I remember talking to Backus, and Backus said of that 08-09 season, he was like, man, everybody felt like we were way ahead of schedule. Now, they went on to miss the playoffs for the next 2 years, but at some point you got to feel like you're ahead of schedule, and that's where the big picture hits you, and it's like, damn, just missed out on the playoffs because that would have been big.
Well, you just think of, how many different times have we been in here throughout the course of the season where we were like, hey, it was a game that they just didn't show up, or it was a game that in the second and third period they were non-existent, or just the inconsistencies are maddening when you talk about this team, because they absolutely should have made the playoffs. There's no reason that they can't be getting in there and giving somebody a real friggin' pain in the butt in the first round.
I think the hard part, too, is watching how Nashville played this year. That's the part that also stings as a Blues fan because, man, when your GM comes out and says we're going to be rebuilding, it's like, oh, okay, so you're going to be bad for a while. And then all of a sudden it's like, nope, we're going to go on an 18-game point streak and put ourselves in the playoffs. That also is the part that stings a little bit because you felt like, at least in the Central Division, it was Colorado, it was Dallas, it was Winnipeg, and then you and Minnesota were fighting for that next part, and then Nashville was behind you. And instead, Nashville leapfrogged both of you, and you and Minnesota were the ones fighting below them.
Yeah, and just while we're talking about Nashville for a second, I want to interject. So many people I've heard from in the past couple of weeks, months, Ryan O'Reilly, you should have signed him and you should have given him what Nashville gave him, basically. Well, the Blues made an attempt to keep Ryan O'Reilly, I think, before they traded him to Toronto, and he wanted a lot of years and more money than he got in Nashville. So the opportunity was potentially there to keep him, but when you're talking about 6 years for a guy who's 30, 31, and you're talking about, $6 million or so, maybe that didn't make a lot of sense for the Blues. So he goes to Nashville. Obviously, he's had a lot of success. The team has had success. They're in the playoffs. The Blues aren't, and now everybody wants to come out and say, well, the Blues should have signed this guy. Okay, but, that opportunity wasn't there for the Blues to jump on.
And probably didn't make a heck of a lot of sense at that time as well. The thing that's kind of scary to me as we're talking about this is that the Predators, pardon me, no matter what they do in the playoffs, have a hell of a trade chip in Saros. So,
yeah.
That can go a long way in helping with other deficiencies on that team for next year. And I got to tell you, I don't love that.
And they just drafted, was it 11th or 12th overall this past draft? Like, they just got about the same tier of a draft pick as you did. And you're right, Saros is going to be the biggest trade chip. I know I've seen people say, like, well, you don't trade Saros. Look at how good he is and look at what he's done. They've got a kid in the minors that I think is, like, put together a historic season in the American Hockey League. Like, they will be moving on from Jussi Saros next year. And imagine the pieces that you could – we talk about, like, what you could get for Binnington. What could you get for a Jussi Saros, who is a Vezina Trophy winner in the past?
We're going to find out.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to ask I want to ask a few things Blues related here, and then we've got some NHL stuff that we got to talk about, specifically this Phoenix disaster and Phoenix moving to Salt Lake and all that sort of thing. But one of the things that I found to be incredibly interesting, I think sometimes you guys, one of the things that I've learned from you guys is that you can sort of pick up a lot by just listening and things. Kevin Hayes getting scratched a couple of games in a row to me is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Am I wrong in saying that? Am I looking too much into it by saying that is a really big deal? Is Kevin Hayes potentially a guy that could get bought out in the end of the what's going on here with this guy?
I don't believe he'll get bought out because Doug doesn't buy people out. Right. And I know Doug has said that, if we need to, we'll buy players out. I just don't buy it, especially – Hayes would be, I think I looked at it like a cap hit of like 1.5, 1.7 for 2 years or whatever. Still don't buy it. I think they view it as like, yeah, he's a piece of this. I found it interesting because it wasn't just those 2 straight games. It was the game against the San Jose Sharks as well. He sat against the Sharks, played the Ducks, and then you came home and then you sat those next 2 games.
That's
sat 3 of 4 games. And the Sharks one, Bannister didn't say much with it. He just said, no, he was healthy to play. But then it was, I guess, going into that afternoon game where he basically said, look, he can't be making these mistakes on the ice. Or maybe it was the Carolina Hurricanes game that he said, he can't be making these big mistakes. He's supposed to be a veteran, a leader, and if you're going to make those mistakes, we can't put you in the lineup. So props to Bannister. He's done the accountability thing. Hey, we've talked about this earlier this season too, Donnie, to where, there have been a lot of people hard on Kevin Hayes, and I don't know what people were expecting out of Kevin Hayes because at times I felt like Kevin Hayes has disappeared from the game. But Kevin Hayes is exactly who I thought he was going to be. I thought he was going to be a third-line center who was awesome in faceoffs, maybe give you 30, 35 points, and you're a centerman with a veteran presence. So, like, on that aspect of it, I feel like 95% of the season he's done that. But, I mean, look, Bannister talked about accountability. You can't have veterans making mistakes. And, I mean, the mistake that he made in that Anaheim Ducks game was glaring. It was a puck in the neutral zone where he tried to stick handle around a couple of players and then just put it in, but the pass was just barely crossed the blue line. Anaheim grabbed it up the ice, and it was a breakaway for Anaheim.
Can I ask this? And maybe this is a stupid question, but when you're a guy like Kevin Hayes that has as much time in the NHL as you do, you're on a guaranteed contract, you know you're going to get paid the money that's on the remainder of that contract. When you're sitting those games, what does that do? Does that, I mean, I'm not even trying to be ignorant when I ask this, but like, does it even make a difference?
Well,
does the dude even care?
It's a fair,
is it embarrassing?
It's a fair thing to wonder. I think Alex and I both heard Joey Vitale tell the story. He said he had a conversation with Kevin.
Yeah.
I did not. So Vitale had a conversation with Kevin Hayes, and yeah, it really ticked him off to sit. So, and that's not something where Kevin knows Joey's going to,
of course,
say on the air. He's not looking for somebody to tell everybody how ticked off he was. That's those two talking, and he, just one-on-one said, yeah, I was really ticked off. So I feel like, he's one of those guys who definitely wants to be out there down the stretch regardless of what the situation is. To me, when you think about the Kevin Hayes situation, yeah, he was about what you expected him to be this year, but I always wondered about that term on the contract. Like, he's early 30s, slowing down a little bit, and if you count on him to come in and be your third-line center for a couple of years, I don't know that you can expect that going into next year. Like, to me, he could play on the wing next year, or if he is a center, like, he might even be your fourth-line center. I don't know when Oscar Sundqvist is going to be ready after
you got
the ACL.
Zach
Dean coming in. So I think the healthy scratch could signal that they're not infatuated and they could try to move him this year. I don't think they'll buy him out like Alex said. I think they probably could retain a little bit of salary, and then maybe a team wants him in a trade for half of what he's making right now, which is, 1.5. Mm-hmm. So I think that option could present itself. But I think that, if the Blues are in this retool, and I keep wondering, how competitive do they want to be? I don't know that Kevin Hayes makes you that much more competitive on a nightly basis.
Well, and it comes to the coaching thing, too. Like, you got to figure out, like, is Bannister your coach? Do you have another head coach? Because I think the coaching decision is going to decide what this roster looks like more than anything. Like, I really believe if a coach comes in and they feel like that's the coach that is going to take this team to the next level, they are going to dictate, like, I don't know if this guy matches what we're trying to accomplish here. Like, the whole point of bringing in Kevin Hayes was bring in veteran leadership, to bring in somebody who could lighten the mood throughout the season and bring a little consistency to the lineup. I mean, JR has been in the locker room way more than I have. I don't know if it feels any lighter than what it did last year. I mean, you got scratched if you're Kevin Hayes from the veteran leadership perspective of making those mistakes, and there was really no consistency this season. So, I mean, all three areas don't feel like you nailed any of them with that trade. And let's also remember the trade, too. This isn't to belittle Kevin Hayes at all, but the trade originally reported from Philadelphia was for Sanheim and Hayes. And then when that trade fell through because Torrey Krug taking that no-trade clause, then they just went back to the well and said, cool, we'll trade for Kevin Hayes.
So this was not Plan A, is what you're saying.
Well,
it was part of Plan A. Yeah.
But then when that plan changed, it was, okay, well, we do need a
they
veteran,
still wanted him
so
they
let's
wanted that
get him.
there.
Yeah, and at the price, I mean, look, you got him for 50% of his salary for like a future sixth round. So at the end of the day, it was kind of what you did with Verana and Kapanen, where it's like, we're not really losing anything here. The only thing is now you're attached to that contract for 2 years if you don't feel like he's a part of the solution.
That's the thing. Like, if there was a year, 2 years left, but there's 3 years left in that deal, and now after this year, 2 more.
Yeah.
All right, so here's what I say. I think that, and we got to hit on it because we just need to, because Coach Q has been in the media the last week or so a bunch. But I think that we want to have a larger conversation about all of this on Friday when we podcast again. But I just kind of get the general feeling, just as a Blues fan, that Drew Bannister is not going to get this job going forward. And Jeremy, I think you just did an article in The Athletic today about the Blues and their coaching search.
Yeah, Donnie, just published probably about 20 minutes ago. And so I've been working on it for a couple days, just making some phone calls, trying to figure out where this coaching search is. Obviously, we'll know more in the next few days. Doug Armstrong and Drew Bannister are going to talk to the media on Thursday at Centene at 11:30, so maybe there will be some clues there. I don't expect any announcement to be made, this week. And I think part of that has to do with the potential candidates that are out there, including Joel Quenneville. When is that situation going to get resolved with the league? When is he going to be reinstated? So I think, I looked at it when the email came out that said Bannister's going to be part of this year-end review, that he's still in the mix. So I'm not saying he's going to keep the job, but I think that the Blues have to kind of play their hand right, keep him in the mix, because who are they going to get? Are they going to get Joel Quenneville? Can that be something that gets addressed soon with the league, and then they can make the coaching hire there? And I'm not saying that it's going to be Joel Quenneville. I think they have interest in other candidates too. The one name to keep an eye on, David Carl, Denver University, just won his second national championship in the last 3 years. Won it in 22 and won it this year. He's only 34 years old.
Wow.
And he's been at Denver for 6 years. I think 3 Frozen Fours. Tremendous success with Denver. The thing is, only 34 years old, but he's got the making of an NHL coach. And the thing that I wonder, I'll get your guys' opinion on this, is, I realize the Blues have some veterans, 32, 33, 34, but this guy could fit in with this young core that they're trying to build. When you talk about the Dvorskys, Bolducs, Snuggeruds, all these guys. So I think he is a guy that they would like to have. I don't know that he's going to leave Denver. They had the parade there last night, and he said, let's build on these 10 championships that we have here with the Pioneers. So they have the most in college history, 10 championships. And can you get him to leave? Is he ready to jump to the NHL? If he is. So Quenneville, Carl, those are the 2 names that I mentioned in the story. In the meantime, I think Bannister kind of hangs out and they keep him as an option, and maybe he becomes an assistant if they bring in a different head coach.
I think the other thing, too, to keep in mind is the teams that are in the playoffs. I mean, it always, if a team gets bounced early, another team fires their coach, and then all of a sudden it's, this guy's available, now we can kind of alter our direction. Here's my question on Carl, JR, and I know we don't have a lot of information on this. 34 years old, as much as you're right, he comes in and you would be a coach for those younger players. The main motive, it feels like, for this team should be who comes in and gets the best out of your players now in the Thomas and the Kyrous. Those are the guys that you're feeling. And Bannister obviously did a really strong job with those players. But I was even looking at the Kyrou numbers. Kyrou last year in the last 20 games of the season had the same numbers that he had this year in the last 20 games. So, kind of the same type of player. If you bring in a Carl, does a 34-year-old get the best out of Kyrou and Thomas? Because that to me is priority number one if you're Doug Armstrong. I got to get a coach that can take these guys, can take Thomas to a 100-point season, can take Kyrou to a 40-goal season.
Yeah, it's a fair question.
Allstate wants to remind fans that mayhem is everywhere. Like when your fantasy league meets up at your house. Everything's great until the hot plate gets too hot for the tablecloth. Now your kitchen's up in smoke. And if you don't have the right home insurance coverage, the cost to fix this is anything but a fantasy. So switch to Allstate, save money, and get protected from mayhem like this. Not available in every state based on coverage selected, subject to terms, conditions, and availability. Savings vary.
I go back, and I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. As Doug Armstrong said, he thought that too much was made out of the fact that he was having trouble relating to the young players today. But, if you have a Doug Armstrong who's got all the experience in the world at the top of the organization, and then you have a young guy behind the bench who can certainly relate. Look how he's related to these 18, 22-year-olds at Denver. Granted, Thomas and Kyrou a few years older, and I know what you're saying. Carl maybe doesn't have the experience to take a 26-year-old Robert Thomas or 25-year-old Jordan Kyrou and take them to the next level skill-wise, attitude-wise, what it takes to play in the NHL-wise. There's so many factors that, it's a legitimate question, but it seems like he's got the knack with these young guys, and he's shown it so far.
One more thing, Donnie. So
Yeah.
the one thing I was thinking of, too, is I was trying to come up with coaches that were going from the college to the NHL level when I read your piece. There's the negative side of it to where, like, and not negative, but Hackstall with the Seattle Kraken, like, there hasn't been a whole lot of success there. Or you got the Jim Montgomery side of it, to where Jim Montgomery, who was a coach, and I think he was at Denver, went straight to Dallas, had the success in Dallas right out of his time in college, of course, had his issues, came to St. Louis, and then now look at him in Boston. So it feels like there's two ends of the spectrum where it's like, hey, this could work. And I feel like if you're Doug, man, you've got a lot of pressure on you to make this coaching hire correct, because this is the guy that's supposed to make this exit out of the retool faster.
Okay, a couple things. First of all, I think Armstrong saying that everybody made too big of a deal about him, talking about communicating with younger players better. I think that's a huge freaking deal. And I think that's what we have been dealing with partially with this team throughout the course of the year, is somebody trying to get into Jordan Kyrou's freaking skull. All right. And I feel as though with the way, not only, I don't want to say that the league is going younger, but the types of young players that are coming up are not going to respond to the old style coach for the most part. We've seen that. So why not try to get a guy that's young that can grab them now? I mean, to me, that is way more exciting. Honestly, and I did not start this podcast today thinking this, but that to me is more exciting than Joel Quenneville. And I know what Coach Q can bring, a great coach, obviously, but on top of the huge amount of baggage that comes with Coach Quenneville, it's another guy in his 60s. It's another old school kind of guy. I know he's a really great one, but I don't know, man. I kind of feel like with as much youth as we have coming up, a young coach would really be a great thing.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I see that's what Alex was saying here with maybe you get, if with an experienced coach, you get more from his experience in terms of developing a Kyrou or a Thomas. But I agree with you. Like, is Quenneville going to come in and play hardball with Jordan Kyrou to try to get him to be the player that everybody thinks he can be? Are we going to see him, benching him? Is this going to be a third coach after Berube and Bannister, even though Bannister's had some good success with them? Is this going to be a third coach who kind of struggles with a Jordan Kyrou if a Quenneville comes in? So I'm not guaranteeing success if David Carl comes in and he's Jordan Kyrou's coach. But I got to believe that, those young guys walk in the locker room and see this fresh face 34. Maybe he's got some new coaching methods that he, and also the way that you interact with the players, the way you handle them. Again, not to keep talking about the success Carl has had, but obviously whatever he's doing is working with these young guys. And so I agree with you. I think that Quenneville could be an unbelievable hire if you put all the stuff aside, which you can't do. I get it, but we don't need to get into all that stuff in the podcast. He would be good in terms of he knows what works in this league, and he would be here to try to get that out of Kyrou Thomas, so on and so forth. But I agree with you. I think a fresh young face with where the Blues are at in their retool could be a lot better than even an experienced aged veteran.
Just looking at both of them in front of him, and I'll play the other side of it just because I agree with what you guys are saying, but the other side of it is, man, if it doesn't work, doesn't that feel like you're stunting the growth of what you're trying to accomplish? Because if it doesn't work, and let's say you give it 3 years, and 3 years Snuggerud, Dvorsky, Lindstein, Stenberg, these guys are here and they're not growing right. Thomas and Kyrou still haven't hit that level and you're still inconsistent. Well, now you missed that opportunity to grow with it, and it feels like you're kind of stuck in reverse. So now you got to go backtrack a couple of years. Like, that's the scary part with it. It does feel like, though, there's two different angles of it. If the Quenneville hire, let's just Quenneville or any of these other head coaches, I don't like the idea of McClellan or Gallant or Evanson, because I don't think those guys do anything. I think you're looking at Quenneville. Maybe if like a Brindamore or a Keefe or somebody like that get fired, that to me would scream, we think we can compete sooner rather than later. This retool is going to be that 3-year window. Next year's year 2. We're hoping by year 3 we're deep into a playoff run. If you go the Carl route or maybe a younger coach, that seems more like hey, this isn't really going to click until Snuggerud, Dvorsky are here when we're getting those guys seasoned in the NHL, which if that's the case, I mean, I think you're talking about like 2026, 2027 before you're even talking about anything legit in a playoff run.
This is the biggest offseason that I can ever remember in Blues history.
Well,
It's
and
the
I was
biggest
gonna
offseason since last year.
Donnie, I was going to say that earlier is a lot of people the last couple of weeks have come up and say, so does it slow down for you when the offseason starts? And I say it's actually the opposite. It's almost like when I go up to my teacher friends and I say, oh, you're off for the summer. They look at me and say, yeah, not off. Especially the administrators. They're like, no, I go in every day in the summer. And I feel bad because then I'm like, I'm guilty of what people are guilty of with me. And they think that I'm off in the summer.
Right.
And I'll tell you this, too. I've said this to Alex before. We have a metrics page at The Athletic that shows us all of our numbers. It shows me when you read the story and when you don't.
We have actually a Donnie Fandango click list. And, Donnie, click on it a little bit more, man.
And I'll tell you this.
Stop clicking on Mike Russo's articles and start clicking on JR's, damn it.
I got to write some, though. But you, when you look at the numbers for the in-season, hey, the Blues beat Boston 5-1 last night. And, the numbers, they're okay. People pay attention, but it's not through the roof. But I'll tell you, if you write about the coaching search, you write about Dvorsky might be coming, or you write about Snuggerud's shot, the numbers are through the roof. You get to free agency and you talk about these 5 guys might be options for the Blues. I mean, that trumps everything that happens in season. So you're right. When you say that the off-season feels like just the start of it, it's certainly the case.
Let me tell you something.
I'm off in the offseason, though, by the way, guys.
First of all, I love Nathan Walker anyway, how he plays. But then he knocks out one of his teammates' teeth. He gets him a cake. I mean, that's very sweet.
Gets him a cake.
If you guys did not see that video, you need to go back if you need a smile. I just love that sort of thing. Obviously, I know that a lot of that is done for social media and things, but I think it does give us a little insight to the personality of some of these guys, even just a little bit. And I just thought that it was really awesome.
Yeah.
And I just love the way that Nathan Walker approaches being in the lineup. He is honored to be a Blue, and I love every single
great.
bit of it.
Did you hear the Chaser story during the broadcast? So Kelly Chase was the color guy for Chris Kerber a couple days ago.
Yeah.
And he said, you just hear Chaser's voice, which we've heard for 20-plus years, and he's on the mic, and he goes, yeah, I saw Nathan Walker in the locker room, and I walked up to him, and I said, can you only fight with one hand or what? And he said, no, why? Well, if you use both. He goes, so Nathan Walker was just glued to Kelly Chase and wanted to get fighting tips from Kelly. Nathan Walker is sitting there getting fighting tips from Kelly Chase.
He solidified himself as a fourth-line player next year and earned that. And I love what Curbs and Chaser both said on that broadcast. They said, everybody on that team should look at Nathan Walker and see that he was up here for, 10 games and got a 2-year contract extension for a one-way.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you could end up back in the minor leagues like last year, but Nathan Walker earned himself a contract and then stayed in the lineup every single night from the moment he was called up until the end of the season because of his attitude, the way that he played, and how he wasn't afraid to drop the gloves if he had to. So, and I know we talk so much about fighting. It doesn't have anything to do with fighting. It just has to do with attitude.
Yeah.
Joey says it all the time, these guys need to have some bite to their game. Nathan Walker plays with that bite. To me, you solidified one of your spots on the fourth line with Nathan Walker this year.
All right, one more thing here, and then I'm going to save the rest of my stuff for Friday. So obviously last week, the news really just starts to break with, the Phoenix or Arizona Coyotes. Looks as though that they are going to be moving to Salt Lake City. This is so unbelievably crazy that it just has not been able to work in Arizona. And it seems like every single hockey person says that if you just get the right bit of land for the stadium, you have got a hockey hotbed down there. You legitimately do.
Yeah.
But the ownership have just absolutely torn this thing up at every level. So Phoenix going to lose a team. Salt Lake City looks like they're going to gain one. But then the gentleman that owns Arizona now is going to be giving first right of refusal, right, if the league expands. So he's going to own the Coyote trademark and all that sort of stuff. Wow.
And if I'm not mistaken, if they get the land approval, they would get an expansion team, correct?
They would be eligible. I think they would be
expansion.
he would be first in line, is what I've read, is that he would be first in line to get that.
Trademark of the Coyotes, you'd have the land, you'd have the stadium, and then it's cool, we'll reward you a team. So think about that for a minute. You lose a team, a roster that, and I haven't gotten to read Katie Strang's piece on The Athletic. I bookmarked it, but basically was talking about how Arizona's it's been an ish show for a long time. But you have a team that you have drug your fan base through for the longest time of like, yeah, we're drifted in the top 10 again, the top 5, the 3rd overall pick, and it's been not a playoff team, not a playoff team, not a playoff team. You feel like you're at least making some strides this season. Bill Armstrong seems like the right guy to be in charge of it all, and now that team gets plucked away and sent to Salt Lake City, and then you get to start fresh. How many teams in the NHL do you think that they would take the opportunity to have their roster taken from them and then be rewarded an expansion team?
I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Because like I have to imagine, and again, I don't know anything about the ownership, but the issue that has been the Arizona Coyotes, you got to think that that's like high-fiving each other. Like, if we get this land, cool, we lost this team that we didn't work, but we're going to get a brand new one, guys. Whoa!
Well, and also from what I understand here, and correct me if I'm wrong, so the NHL is essentially going to be the middleman here between the Arizona ownership and the Salt Lake ownership. So when the team is flipped, the Arizona guy is still going to make a profit from the sale and also be first in line for the expansion team.
Yeah, so he's going to get $1 billion from the NHL for his organization. So that's the unfair part to everybody. You
just ran a crappy organization to get $1 billion.
So whether he ran into red tape or couldn't get the arena built, whatever, they had issues, right? So people are saying you're rewarding a guy for being a bad owner, and then they have the ability to get the expansion team if it comes back, and I think
they would have to pay the money for the expansion team then, right?
Yeah, but it would be $1 billion.
$1 billion.
And so basically you'd be
it's a clean
swapping
wash.
out. So from the NHL standpoint, yeah, you just rewarded a bad owner. However, they get to wash their hands of the Arizona arena issue and all that, put a team in Salt Lake where they have a good owner, and then they only go back to Arizona if things are perfect.
Right.
That's the only way.
When it's exactly right. Because if it is, like we talked about, it's going to be great. And by all accounts, this Salt Lake, the owner for Salt Lake City, or the potential Salt Lake City Coyotes, has been courting them for a long time. They're going to be able to play where the Jazz play, even though they're going to have to make some renovations to that arena.
Which most of those teams do.
So, but it definitely seems like this owner knows the work that's in front of him and is open to it, welcome for it, and ready for it. And it doesn't, if anything, God bless these freaking players. They're going to get a little stability for the freaking first time in 5 years or however
play
long.
in a real rink. My only issue with the entire thing is I've never been to Salt Lake City. Is it still a dry city?
Yeah.
Okay, so what am I going to do when I go?
Believe me, I ask that question all the time. Like, so if you can't drink.
No, wait, but they still sell like liquor at the games and stuff, right? They've got to.
I was told that they didn't.
Really?
Now, I've never been to any Utah Jazz or I've never even been to Salt Lake City. But I was told that they don't sell them at the games.
That might be an angry fan base just because they can't get the beer while they're watching hockey. I don't know. They might be mean as hell when you get in there.
Let's just say this: you better get to the playoffs next year if you're going to be the Salt Lake City Coyotes or whoever you are.
Salt Lake City Sobers.
Yeah, because a team that's not making the playoffs with that many people is going to be angry.
All right, so here's what we got. We got to get cooking here. Let's reconvene here in a couple of days after the Blues season is over, and we can take stock of where we've been, where we're going, all of those sorts of things.
Sounds good. Yep.
Sound like a plan?
You made growth, Donnie. I appreciate that.
I feel like I'm growing as a person and as a hockey fan through this whole thing. I feel like we've
grown as a team on this.
Together. It's the Last Minute Blues podcast for our dudes. Jeff Burton, we miss you so much, my man. Alex Ferrario from 101 ESPN. Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic. I'm Donnie Fandango from 105.7 The Point. Thanks for listening to the Last Minute Blues podcast. And as always, let's go Blues.
The Last Minute Blues podcast. Hear more at 1057thepoint.com.